Let me begin by taking you on a tour of my home office. This is a room in our house that we call the music room. It's a room where you can't turn around without without hitting a guitar case or a microphone boom or a music stand. It's only about 12 by 10 feet, and so it would be a short guided tour here. But I'm inviting you along because you've come to my house to ask my advice. You've set your sights on winning the grand prize in a contest that you saw on TV, a show that celebrates elderly musical talent. Sort of like The Voice, but for geriatric set. Okay. And you've dropped by to ask me for help in writing a pop song about love. You're obviously showing total desperation to be turning to a folk singer to write a pop song, but desperation deserves respect. So I suggest to you that you start with a tried and true phrase like, "You mean the world to me." As it turns out, you kind of like this line of thinking. Then eventually I send you off to call Eric Clapton about backing you up on a song that we put together with the following chorus. Baby, any fool can see you mean the very world to me. Sadly, Clapton finds an excuse not to be available to you. But I buck up your spirits by contending that the song has a chance to make the pop charts anyway, strictly on the appeal of its lyrics, and of course your golden voice. So how can I be so confident that these lyrics will resonate with listeners? Because the power of the phrase, "you mean the world to me," rests on one of the basic assumptions of human nature. Namely, that one person's existence can be meaningful to another person. And that beyond any logical explanation. Because, to put it another way, we have a natural tendency to look to each other for a sense of meaning in life. When a child is born into your family or my family, we typically anticipate the event with great fanfare, celebrate the arrival with proud announcements and accompanying photos. Grandma's wallet full of pictures of little Christina Sue has given way to whole albums of digital photos, accessible on iPhones, iPads, and Facebook pages. By definition, it seems the little person depicted in these photos becomes a meaningful addition to cyberspace and to the family. The concept of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, a tried and true principle of Unitarian Universalism, gets multiplied exponentially when that person is my grandson or your granddaughter, doesn't it? The grandchild in the photograph is a child who means the world to me, and to whom I will mean a great deal for the better part of a decade, at which point the child's horizons will expand beyond family. But not so far as to cause him or her to lose touch with my checkbook, I suppose. A recent episode of the comic strip Zits sums up this process nicely. The teenage son, Jeremy, sits at the breakfast table gazing into the magical depths of his iPhone screen. Suddenly, he quits scrolling through his email to ask his mother a pointed question. "Mom, have you ever experienced a really great high?" Without hesitation, she replies, "Oh yes, the moment you were born." At this point, her son returns to his scrolling with this comment, "Oh, well, for me it was the first taste of 3-meat pizza." What does this exchange tell us about the meaning of a life? For one thing, it tells us that Jeremy's mother, Connie Duncan, has found the deepest meaning imaginable in what you and I might regard as the not-so-enviable task of mothering Jeremy. It's a shared experience, technically, but clearly a bit one-sided in its significance, as Jeremy's pizza comment suggests. Connie actually shares this experience with the larger culture, with all of those mothers dating back millennia who have defined meaning in terms of the particular role of bearing a human life within them and nurturing that child once born, or 2 5-pound childs. Society celebrates that role perhaps above all others. I think I can back up that claim. Compare Mother's Day to Father's Day for a sense of how motherhood fits into the scheme of things in America. Deriving the meaning of one's life from a cultural role such as motherhood can be a two-edged sword, of course. Woman A who cannot have children, or woman B whose spouse has no desire to have children, or woman C who herself has never had the urge to have children, each of these women may end up suffering from a sense of loss, a sense of guilt, a sense of the potential meaning of a life going unrealized. A woman who loses a child may feel that the meaning of her life has been stripped away from her. Back in the 1940s, my grandmother lost the younger of her 2 daughters. There was a sudden onset of fever. The girl was 13 years old at the time. She fell sick on Friday night, and she died on Sunday afternoon. As I was growing up, there were few references to the daughter whose name was Jackie. I always assumed that she died many years before I was born. But my brother recently came across a letter tucked away in my mother's papers that Jackie had written to my mother when Mom was in nurses training and Jackie had been to camp. That letter was written in the summer of 1943, less than 2 years before I was born. It suggests that I, the first grandchild in the family, arrived within a year or so of Jackie's death. Imagine then how meaningful to my grandmother was my arrival on this earth. A child that she could nurture with the strong maternal instincts that had been so tragically betrayed by the untimely death of her younger daughter. Be assured that throughout my life, I was sensitive to the vibrations coming from my grandmother that I was special, beyond all logical explanation. My parents were caught up in a terrible dance of dysfunction that swirled around me like a disruptive tornado for decades. My grandmother was the rock upon which my existence was grounded. For the first 12 years of my life, I was with my grandparents at their cottage on Lake Erie every Sunday and then for weeks at a time in the summers. Grandma had insisted that they move out of the big house in Toledo where she had grown up because she couldn't bear to continue to live in the house where Jackie had died. And so they bought the log cabin cottage in the little lakeside community of Luna Pier, Michigan, where Grandma had often spent weekends and summers with her best friend's family. My experience there in that cottage on Lake Erie is the foundation for much of what makes my life meaningful today. Grandma crafted meaning out of her suffering, and I've been the obvious beneficiary. The concept of meaning in suffering brings to mind a book written by Viktor Frankl in response to his experience at Auschwitz and his subsequent work in psychiatry. The book, which I'm sure is known to many of you, is entitled Man's Search for Meaning. In it, Frankl contends that the search for meaning holds something like absolute status in human life, that it's a given of our existence. He states that there are 3 main avenues by which we arrive at meaning in our lives. First, by creating a work or accomplishing a deed. Second, by experiencing another person in a meaningful way, in a word, love. And third, by adopting an attitude towards suffering or setbacks, which allows us to derive meaning from those negative experiences. The third approach to meaning takes on incredible importance when we consider that Frankl and his wife were separated as he was being thrown in one direction and she in another by the Nazi guards at Auschwitz. He never saw her again, but he found meaning in adopting as positive an attitude toward their separation as possible. He could endure life in the camp on the slim chance that she too might survive so that they could be reunited. Failing that, He would pursue his work on behalf of others in the field of psychiatry with dedication inspired by the love that he had for her. When I consider my grandmother's suffering, I recognize her intuitive effort to turn tragedy into something meaningful. She nurtured me with all of that energy that she expected to direct toward her younger daughter. By investing her love in me, she fought against the grief and the guilt at not being able to save her daughter. I never took that love for granted, and I believe Grandma left this earth with a sense that meaning had indeed come out of her suffering. To round out the story, let me share with you that there were two places besides the shores of Lake Erie that were near and dear to my grandmother: New Orleans and the east coast of Florida. It's no coincidence that I spent my undergraduate years at Tulane University in New Orleans. I heard from Grandma from day one, New Orleans is the greatest city in the world. Or that Martha and I have enjoyed a wonderful life here on the east coast of Florida since our retirement almost 15 years ago. I have a postcard with the Orange Blossom Special that says, "By Streamliner through sunny Florida." And on the other side, there was still the days when you could send a postcard for a penny. And Grandma writes on it, "We went down to Titusville to fish for shrimp yesterday, and boy did I eat." Grandma, 100%, very enthusiastic about everything. Now, obviously, I have much to be thankful for in this matter of one person adding meaning to the life of another. I recently learned of the case of a young man who was not nearly so fortunate in his early life, but who effected for himself a total transformation in the direction of a meaningful life. Shaka Sagor grew up in a tough neighborhood. He was shot 3 times on a street corner at the age of 17. He survived, only to fall into the life of a street tough, a drug dealer, who at the age of 19 went to prison for shooting a man in a location not unlike the street corner on which he had been shot. In prison, Shaka Sagor fell in with those who were involved in profiting from black market contraband. When confronted with his part in these activities, he was belligerent to the guards. As a result, he was slapped into solitary confinement. He remained in a tiny solitary cell for 7 years. Still embittered, combatant. It was a letter from his young son that turned his attitude around. The son said, "My mother has just told me what you went to prison for. You killed a man. Dad, Jesus would never want you to do something like that. You need to listen to him." The words of his son were decisive in helping Shaka Sagor to find a new direction for his life, even when it seemed as if there was no way out from his circumstances there in that cell. He began to read voraciously, turning the cell into a veritable library. He set himself a schedule of studying a new subject every hour as if he were enrolled in school. And when he came across Plato's account of what Socrates said about the unexamined life, Shaka examined his own life. There in solitary confinement, he responded to the inner call for meaning. One important step for Shaka was to reach out to his son, admitting that he had done terrible things in his youth, and that he had suffered terribly as a result. He dedicated himself to making that suffering meaningful by turning his prison experience into the launchpad for a life that would focus on his relationship with his son and on taking his story on the road to reach other young men with the prospect of a better life. And I heard him in a TED Talk on a podcast. Shaka's story is not one of redemption through religious conversion, but rather a story of finding meaning in a place that was there for him if he could humble himself to search for it. I have no doubt that as he stood on the TED stage telling his story, he felt the presence of his son at his side. You may recall the famous poem by Edwin Arlington Robinson entitled Richard Cory. It's one of a number of Robinson's poems about people who have grown up and lived in a small town in Maine and who have ended up in dead-end lives. Mr. Flood's Party, for example, is a poem that concludes with the image of an old man sitting with a jug of liquor at his side, looking down at the town where all doors are closed to him. It's got the most beautiful image. He sits the jug down carefully, knowing that most things break. The poem Richard Cory, which was actually adapted for a song by Paul Simon, involves a man to whom the entire community looks up. He's rich, handsome, aloof. And the working class people of the town all aspire to that lofty pedestal on which Richard Cory stands. But the poem ends tragically, a testament to how little we know about the meaning of another person's life. And in that ending, the poet Edwin Arlington Robinson hints at the true source of meaning, which is in the shared day-to-day struggle for existence among the townspeople. Here's the final verse. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. When the suffering is solitary, the poet seems to be saying, when the suffering is invisible, and the solitary sufferer cannot find an avenue for potential meaning, there may be no redeeming quality to that suffering. Well, I think you'll agree that I'd be an ogre of a Sunday speaker if I were to leave you on that sad note. So let me suggest this about our natural urge to find meaning in our lives. Don't listen to them. Don't accept other people's assumptions about your life. Don't let them set your goals. And for goodness sake, don't beat yourself up over failing to achieve goals that, when you analyze them, do not come from your center of being. Every day, the newspaper and the television celebrate winners. And yet, you finished 43rd in the 5K charity run. You trained so hard for it. To add insult to injury, the woman down the block won the race. I suggest that you smile at her picture in the paper and tip your hat to her. But don't beat yourself up over finishing 43rd. You ran the race because you believed in the cause. You drew upon your best physical resources to promote the cause. You suffered for that cause with every painful, blistered step of the final 2,000 meters. You enjoyed the camaraderie of other runners and the encouragement of your family and friends to make it to that finish line. You showed that you care, and they showed that they care about you. That constitutes a meaningful finish in 43rd place. Sometimes caring hurts badly, but it also forms the basis for extending yourself to others, for putting yourself in a position to share the best of yourself with others. My grandmother didn't fold her tent and collapse when faced with the biggest loss I can imagine. She picked up the pieces and set up a new tent and became the most important person in the world to a kid who definitely needed to feel that support. If you know me, you know that I'm not the greatest songwriter that you'll ever meet, nor the greatest guitarist, nor the greatest singer, nor the greatest wildlife photographer. I've never won a Grammy or placed a photo in the Audubon magazine. But I do, thank you. But I do put myself in a position to share my music and my photography with others at the highest level that I can. I find meaning in that sharing, and I believe that is what matters. I believe that living positively is where the meaning lies. And I believe that my grandmother, who was actually a pretty good photographer, instilled that lesson in me. So let me conclude by offering a bet that I'm not the greatest Sunday speaker you've ever heard either. I proudly represent the ranks of dependable local talent at an affordable price. My excuse for standing before you at all is that I hope by sharing my thoughts and my experiences with you, I can provide a spark to add to the collective light that our chalice symbolizes. Right alongside you, I am thankful every day that intelligent, well-intentioned, dedicated people can gather freely, as we do today, to ponder such matters as the meaning of a life. Good.
Bravo.